All right, do a little quick recap here. Thus far, I have completely constructed the carcass for the cabinet as well as the face frame. I've also been able to glue the face frame to the carcass, as you can see here. I've also been able to rip and glue in some small pieces to pack out the inside of the cabinet so it's flush with the face frame. So when I put the drawer slides on there, they won't be catching on the face frame. This will come out of the clamps here in about an hour or so. The other stuff I've been doing is what you can see over here is I've ripped all the door pieces to width. So I've ripped all the drawer pieces to width here. 7 3/4 for the bottom two, 9 1/4 for the third one, and then the top one's going to be a very shallow drawer just for small items. So I've ripped them all to width. Next up, I'm going to cut them all to the appropriate length. I'm going to be using a lock miter bit to make these drawers, and it'll be my first time doing that. I was doing some test pieces over here before, and just to get a feel for how it worked and how bad the setup was. You can see it didn't turn out too bad actually. It took me about 8 tries, but I did get it to where the two edges do come together pretty decently. Got some little. So I imagine it's going to take me a couple of setups with this plywood, because I'm guessing they're not the exact same thickness, but I should be close with my setup. So the way it works out is that I can cut these to the exact length that I need, and then the points will stay intact. So I need the front and back pieces to be 20 5/8, and I need the left and right hand pieces to be 23 inches long. So I'm going to go ahead and cut them now on the table saw, and then we'll be ready to make some lock miters. So what you see here is me cutting a lock miter in the very short or shallow drawer pieces, and that was a bit of a challenge, but I did manage to get it to work by using an extra piece of wood to help stabilize it. Cutting the lock miter joints and the rest of the drawer components were fairly easy. The taller the drawer is, the more stable it is when it's on its edge on the router table, so it makes it pretty straightforward to do. Next up here, I'm using a dado blade in my table saw to rip the grooves for the drawer bottoms. The drawer bottoms are made out of 1/4 inch MDF, which works out nicely because a 1/4 inch dado stack fits that spot on. After doing a dry fit of the drawers, I take a measurement and then rip the drawer bottoms to width, and then off camera I'll cut them to length. At this point in time, I have been working on the drawers all morning, and what I have here is one of the drawer boxes. You can see it with the bottom fit in now, and it's probably hard to make out, but you can see some of these grooves. Beep. Well, at least I didn't break anything. So what you can see is a couple of the grooves cut. These will be used to put some dividers in the very back of the drawer to store sandpaper and whatever else. The lock miters are all finished up. They work pretty well. The really narrow pieces for the top drawer are kind of hard to do. In the future, I think I'll cut it to length and then make the lock miter down one whole edge and the other edge, and then rip it into the drawer heights. That would have been a lot more stable than clamping on like an additional piece of wood and run it through there, but I got to work. So next up, I'm going to disassemble the boxes, and it's probably kind of hard to see. I'll point the camera down here, kind of make out a cutout for a pull. I'm just going to cut a notch out so you can access the drawer to pull it out. And as well, this cutout is low enough for the Festool little T-handle thing, so you reach in there, pop that open, flip the Festool container up, and pull out the sander that's going to be stored in these two drawers. So after I get done cutting out the handle and sanding that, I'm going to take the drawers apart, the whole drawers apart, and sand them down just like 120, just real quick pass, and then I will be gluing them back together. I'm cutting the handles out on the drawers with a jigsaw, and what you'll probably see is I have to move the holdfast around, or move the direction I'm sawing from to get around the holdfasts. Jigsaws make a lot of dust. A mask is a good idea. After I sand one set of drawer parts, I move on to gluing up that drawer. Just helps break up a little bit of the monotony of sanding, and also if I have enough drawers, I will run out of clamps. So I like to clamp that first one up, and maybe by the time I get to if I had more drawers, let's say the 8th drawer, I would run out of clamps and have to pull them off the first drawer. So you see here, just checking square before I start clamping things together, make sure I'm close. And then I'm adding not too many clamps. I had 4 to this one. I think maybe some of the drawers required additional clamps where maybe I had a little bit larger gap in the corner. This first one just needed 4. And here are all the drawers glued up. You can see them laying on the ground. I started working on the dividers while the glue was drying. And you can also see from the shaky footage here, I'm laying out the drawer slides on the inside of the cabinet. I'm using those 3/4, those packing strips I had in there before, and then I'm using I ripped down some pieces of plywood or MDF here to set the spacing on both sides so they're equal. All right, it's the end of the weekend here. I've gotten this far on the cabinet. One thing that you saw in the video that I want to explain a bit is these lower 2 drawers. They were too wide by, I don't know, a 1/16 of an inch or so. I don't know if it's probably hard to see in there. I'm gonna zoom in, but I had to take a notch out with the router. So you had to shave off a 1/16 on the bottom 2 drawers. I'm still a little stumped as to why all the drawer parts were cut at the same exact time, using the same setup on the table saw. So I'm not sure what happened there. So yeah, like I said, I'm not really sure what happened there, but I fixed it. They pull out nice. Not a problem. Just kind of ugly looking from the side. But then these top 2, I didn't need to do that at all. So I don't know if it's I did buy the plywood at different times. You can see the colors. So maybe this plywood is, I don't know, a 32nd thinner than the bottom 2. But anyway, it's all in there. That pretty much does it for the weekend. So next steps here, I'm going to take the drawers back out, sand the outside of the case, sand all the glue off the drawers, apply finish to the drawers, and then I'm going to start making the door that's going to conceal the front of this. Just going to be a simple frame and panel door with probably a piano hinge on the side. I wanted to take a couple minutes just to explain what I'm doing here. So I'm making the frame and panel door for the front of the cabinet, and I'm working on the frame right now, which is just some oak that I had, scrap oak from a table I cut up a long time ago that was destined for the trash by a neighbor. So it's been cut into strips. They're about 1.25 inches wide by about 7/8 thick, and I've cut them all to the proper length. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to be joining the corners with a bridle joint, and then the panel will sit in a groove, of course, in the center of the frame. And how I'm going to make that, originally I thought put a dado stack in the table saw and cut the groove, but then since the plywood's slightly undersized and the smallest, I have a 1/4 inch panel, so the smallest dado blade I have is a 1/4 inch, and with the plywood being undersized, it may not fit. It won't be a very tight fit. So I thought about using the router table, which I got the bits out to do that, and I thought against it. I'm going to use my standard 24 tooth ripping blade, which is got a square top, and I'm going to pass it through on one side. I'm going to pass it through one way, flip it around, pass it the other, which will center the groove, and then I'll keep moving the fence away from the blade to make that groove a little wider. After I get done with that, I'm then going to take my tenon jig and cut the, I guess what would be the mortise of the bridle joint in the end of each piece with the mortising with the tenoning jig, and then from there I'll come back and cut the tenons with the probably just with my standard blade here, since I only have to do 4 of them, and just mark the shoulder, cut close to the shoulder, and then clean that up by sliding it back and forth to clean that tenon up, and then probably have to hit it with a shoulder plane and a chisel to square up the shoulders. So that's the process I'm going to try here. I got some scrap, but I got some layout lines on that I'm going to give that a shot first and see how that fits the door. And then I'll use my other scraps to set up the tenoning jig and just work through it. Get to work. I'm dialing in the exact groove width I need to fit the panel here at the table saw. You can see I'm finally achieving I'm getting close to achieving the correct fit that I want. That one feels pretty good, so now I continue on with the rest of the components. And as I mentioned, I'm using my tenoning jig to cut the, I guess what would be the mortises in the frame. Just making one pass, flipping it around, and cutting that in the end. And here I'm showing the finished mortise section of the bridle joint. The one area that I did mess up here is that there is a small gap between my tenon pieces and this mortise I'm cutting here. I cut the tenons narrower, and so it left a gap exposed on the outside. But shop furniture, I guess, doesn't really hurt anything. But I learned a lesson here. When I use bridle joinery, I have to watch out for how that exterior surface is going to look after everything is cut. I'm moving on to cutting the tenon sections of the bridle joints, and here I'm using a marking gauge just to mark out all those where all the shoulders are going to be for the tenons. And then after that, I move on to the table saw and cross cut all those and remove all the waste with the standard table saw, or with the standard blade in my table saw. And here you can see that small gap I'm talking about on the very ends of the piece. The tenon doesn't extend as far as the mortise I cut, so you can see a little gap over there. But what I'm doing, measuring for square, I'm measuring for the panel as well, how large that has to be, and then I'll cut that out of plywood in a moment here. At this point in time, I have everything cut, everything ready to go, so I am applying some shellac to the various components. I'm doing all the exterior surfaces from an appearance standpoint. The shellac just gives it a little more depth to color. I do eventually end up spraying a coat of polyurethane on all of this before I do the assembly. I didn't capture any of that on film. Pretty boring. It's me just spraying a coat of polyurethane on everything. One of the last things I captured video of was cutting a small mortise for the continuous hinge that I'm using for the front door. I am using the router table here just to make it a little bit more stable instead of trying to balance a small trim router on here. I'm just using the router table to cut the mortise for the hinge, and I'm doing this just so the door itself has a tighter fit to the face frame. Basically cutting it nearly to the depth of the entire hinge, so when the door shuts, it's completely flat against the face frame. And after I do this, I apply some shellac to the frame of the door, which hasn't had any shellac yet. I apply my first coat. I apply a coat of polyurethane, and then I assemble everything. So what you can see here is everything after getting assembled. I attach the casters, put back in the drawers, attach the door and the catch. So that sums it up for this project. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. If you like this video, please like or subscribe. If you have any comments, feel free to leave those as well. Thanks again.